I remember that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a movie they made out of it called The Tower.
Yeah.
Where he left a note saying, I just want to kill people. Something must be wrong with my brain. Please, when I die,
look into this.
They looked, and there was a tumor putting pressure on a part of the. In fact, that's how we learn anything about how the brain works when you have situations like this.
Person had the free will to write a note. He had the free will to write the note. So he did not have the will to resist shooting. But that's the line that you were talking about is a partial one.
Why isn't that line always in motion as we learn more and more about how the mind works?
It is.
Okay, so then maybe it's a line of convenience today, but tomorrow we're going to find out, oh my gosh, that person has no real free control over their behavior, over their personality, over their tendencies, over their treatment of others.
So why do we insist on drawing a bright line called free will if the universe, from neurons to galaxies, seems to paint in gradients? We're told that choice is a private spark, a sovereign moment inside the skull. But the first astronomical lesson is that motion obeys laws. Planets don't improvise their orbits, and comets don't decide to swing past the sun just to be dramatic. If matter in motion follows rules out there, then matter in motion follows rules in here, because a brain is made of the same atoms as the stars. That sits uncomfortably next to cases where a small lesion turns a gentle person violent, or a tumor erases restraint while leaving intelligence intact. The tension is immediate. We say, you chose, yet sometimes what changes is not a soul, but a circuit. If cause and effect get a vote in our decisions, how many votes do they get? The unsettling thought is that the ballot might be full. Classical physics once offered a clean, if cold, answer. Give me every position and momentum at a single instant, and I will compute the past and future. Laplace's dream of a universe without surprises. If that's true, your decision tomorrow was written into the initial conditions of the cosmos. Not exactly the romance of autonomy. But the cosmos refused to be that simple. It gave us chaos, where utterly deterministic rules produce patterns so sensitive to tiny differences that prediction collapses. Weather is lawful and still escapes long-term forecasts. The brain, with billions of neurons interacting, vibrates in that same regime. Lawful, yet exquisitely sensitive. A stray photon hitting your retina, a fluctuation in an ion channel, a cosmic ray flipping a molecular switch, small things that, in a churning network, can scale into big differences. Unpredictability enters the stage, and that feels like freedom. But hold on, randomness is not agency. A coin toss doesn't choose anything. This gives us a different kind of tension. What if our choices are neither scripted nor authored, but simply noisy? Quantum physics complicates the picture in a new direction. At the atomic scale, quantum theory supplies only probabilities for what measurements will record, and experiments, including Bell tests, show that no locally predetermined script can account for those statistics. That indeterminacy is woven into the theory and borne out by nature's data. Still, when we step up to warm, wet biology, coherence washes out, and neurons behave like classical devices with probabilistic components. So, yes, at the bottom there's uncertainty, in the middle there's chaos that can magnify it, at the top there's behavior that can turn on a dime. Yet none of this randomness upgrades into responsibility. If a radioactive decay in a synapse nudges you to say yes instead of no, it wasn't you in any meaningful sense. So the friction isn't resolved by quantum magic. It forces a different question. Where, in this cascade from micro to macro, does authorship live, if not at the coin flip's mercy and not in the iron grip of determinism? Thermodynamics nudges us toward a better compass. The universe flows from lower to higher entropy. Structures dissolve, patterns fade, stars burn down their gradients. Yet brains run a countercurrent. They consume energy to create and manipulate internal models of the world, compressing experience into memory and projecting futures into decision space. That modeling takes work. Erasing a bit of information has a minimum energy cost. Your brain pays that bill billions of times a second, just to keep options alive. And here's a strange lesson from orbital mechanics. A spacecraft gains freedom not by escaping gravity altogether, but by learning to use it, stealing momentum from a planet with a well-timed swing. Constraints don't merely limit options, they define the landscape in which skill can matter. With a map of forces, a navigator converts necessity into choice. So maybe authorship is not a ghost perched above physics, but a layered process within it, a dynamical system that uses information to bias outcomes toward goals. That's not a mystical exemption, it's a thermodynamic achievement. Bring this down to the ground where lives are lived. Damage the prefrontal cortex and the brakes go soft. Strengthen it with practice, therapy, or sleep, and impulse bows to deliberation. Early trauma narrows the space of viable futures. Education widens it. Poverty loads the dice. Resources flatten them. In the language of cosmology, initial conditions matter, so much so that two universes with the same laws can evolve into wildly different structures. The same is true of people. We talk about blame as if character springs from nowhere, but character is a history of interactions, with a brain that metabolizes experience into habit. That complicates our moral arithmetic, but it doesn't erase it. If agency is the capacity to simulate consequences, reflect on values, and steer behavior accordingly, then responsibility scales with that capacity. A tumor that hijacks control shrinks it. A mind trained to recognize its own biases expands it. The line doesn't vanish, it gradients, and gradients can be measured, cultivated, and, crucially, engineered. Zoom back out. Galaxies form where tiny ripples in the early universe seeded gravity's work, turning quantum whispers into luminous cities. Complexity emerges when energy flows through matter in just the right way. Stars, cells, minds. In that cascade, you're not an isolated atom rattling in a void. You're a hierarchy of feedback loops from reflexes up to principles. The photon that hits your eye does not dictate what you value. It's intercepted by a system already poised to interpret, weigh, and decide. That system was built by genes, sculpted by childhood, educated by culture, and tuned by personal effort. It's not arbitrary to credit the person for the steering that genuinely occurs at that level. It's simply acknowledging that causation in the universe is multi-level. Bottom-up pushes meet top-down constraints. A law doesn't care about your goals. A brain does, and that difference makes a difference. So, why draw a bright line? Because we crave clarity when stakes are high. But clarity can be honest without being simplistic. Astronomy taught us that clocks in orbit tick at different rates and that GPS only works when we correct for relativity. Justice, too, must become relativistic, not in the sense of anything goes, but in the sense that context shapes capacity. We can build a society that increases agency the way engineers build stable orbits, by designing environments where good trajectories are easy to enter and hard to escape. That is not an excuse, it's a blueprint. Now, answer the question. We insist on a bright line between choosing and being caused because it feels administratively clean and emotionally satisfying. But the universe doesn't draw that line for us. It gives us lawful processes, stochastic inputs, and systems capable of modeling and modulating their own behavior. Free will, then, is not a skyhook outside physics. It is the hard-won, energy-consuming ability of a brain to use information to bias its actions toward its endorsed goals within the constraints it inhabits. The more of that ability, the more we rightly hold someone to account. The less of it, the more we repair the system rather than punish the part. That's the gradient that runs from neurons to galaxies, and that's why the line should not be bright, because understanding it as a spectrum is the only way to respect both science and the very real experience of choosing. Like if this was interesting, and hit the subscribe for more.